Hey, what's
Wait,
up, everybody?
fancy finding you all here, huh?
I know,
Yeah.
my goodness, here we are again.
Look
Greg,
at some.
gotta love the background, man. Looks
Got to
great.
represent. Look at Brian. Brian's live from live inside the hive. Dr. Humberto Jr. up there.
This is
I just,
like live from
I
the
just,
hive.
I just have my room, my guest bedroom back here is what mine is, but that's okay.
See?
Anyway, welcome everybody to another stream team beekeeping chat tonight. This is going to be a
There you
good
go.
one, talking about topics I think that are on everybody's minds right now with spring just around the corner. Greg, Brian, what's up in you guys' world?
Brian, you first.
Warmth. I tell you, today we had a day in Northeast Ohio. It What did we get up to? 67, 68 degrees. And I was in Cleveland all day, just basically fiending to drive home so that I could like crack a lid.
Nice.
So, yeah, it was just so difficult sitting up at work today, but it's okay. I mean, it's February 15th. So, to have days like this early in the year in Ohio, it's just so unheard of. So, I think I was listening to the news this morning and they were talking about the number of days where we've broke 70, in February, and it's only a limited number. So, to have this warm weather now it's nice, but it does concern you a little bit. Just you want to make sure that your colonies have adequate stores just to get through this little spell here. But man, I'm just itching to get into them. So
How about you, Greg? What are you up to, man?
Well, last night had the honor of speaking to a beautiful crowd of beekeepers down in Benton, Kentucky at the Clarks River Bee Club. Had a great time just sharing our family story and beekeeping, and it was a lot of fun. At Here at the farm, it's just like everywhere else, things are busting loose, and I want to throw something out there that you're going to see a lot of conversation in different parts of the country where folks are going to ask questions, and you're going to see 10 different opinions, and you're going to see some people who are going to posture and they're going to position and they're going to belittle. I want to encourage folks, as you see folks asking for help and asking for questions, let's keep things positive. Let's actually try to help somebody. Let's not use it as a way to be divisive and divide, where this guy's doing that, he must be doing it wrong. There are so many different ways to do all this. And one of the current questions that we're seeing popping up all over the place is, should I feed my bees pollen sub? Should I feed my bees pollen patties? Is it good? Is it bad? Yes. Depends on what you're doing and what your goals are. But for what we're doing in Zanesville, Ohio, in our context, we have had pollen sub out all week long to see what the bees are doing with it. And they're absolutely destroying it. They're hitting it hard. And we're getting ready to put some Hive Alive pollen patties on starting next week in small intervals and small increments, and slowly start building them up. And you're going to hear a lot of folks that say, absolutely don't feed your bees pollen. It's going to cause them to brood up too early, too soon. It's going to be too cold. There's a lot of misinformation when it comes to that. And Bruce, we're going to get into it tonight, because tonight is all about managing swarms and making splits and
That's
getting
right.
bees to brood and getting to that magic zone. That's what it's all about. Bruce, what are you up to in your neck of the woods?
Well, first of all, Greg, I wanted to mention to you, you're doing a great job with your podcast, man. I didn't get to see the Sunday one yet, but I watched the one you did with Seth Hill. Man, what a great guy that
Oh yeah.
his motor never stops, and he is so happy and positive. He is one of the most. I kind of met him, I think, at Hive Life, but I didn't really know who he was. I knew who he was, but I didn't really know him at all. But man, I don't know if I've ever felt that much positive energy from one person for 2 hours straight, or however long that thing was, but about hour and a half, however long that lasted. Man, that was positive energy, and that guy is something. He's awesome. I just really enjoyed that, and it was great. And also, I just enjoy, you and Susie, what you're doing, and you're doing a great job with your channel over there in the podcast. I just want to congratulate you on that. It's just, you're doing a great job.
Thanks, Bruce.
And I had the opportunity Saturday to talk to Corey from Stevens Bee Company in Missouri, and had a really nice chat with him about definitions of VSH, SMR, OBU, IPM. What is a just different things I wasn't really sure about. And he went back to Beekeeping 101, VSH 101 with me, and we really went through that. And so for anyone who's ever had questions about that, I know that Corey has had a lot of interviews of late and explained and talked to a lot of people. He's kind of made the circuit, but my whole goal with that was to just break it down in simple terms. And so if you get a chance to watch that, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, there's just a wealth of information there, not from me, but I just kind of tried to lead him with the questions. He answered the questions, and it was just really I really picked his brain, and there's some great stuff there. And also for those in the South who might be concerned about using Formic Pro, because it is it's a very sensitive product that has to be used properly. It scares a lot of people, especially down here, because of the restrictions on it and what you hear. I had a great interview with Tom Nolan from the company, I guess it's Nod Apiary products up in Canada, but that's the company that actually develops and sells the Formic Pro and the Mitaway Quick Strips. Great interview with him a few days ago as well. So those are a couple of the more recent videos on the channel. If you get a chance to check those out, there's some great information there if you're interested in that stuff, and you can make a more informed decision. I'm still nervous about the Formic Pro, but I think as fast as things are growing up here right now, there's just not a lot of options because we got to start stacking honey supers up before too long, and so Apivar is kind of out. Oxalic acid vapor, it knocks down the ferretic mites, but it doesn't really, it's hard to lower the numbers if you're already high. So what do you do if you got your springtime treatment here? What do you do? And so I'm nervous about it, but I may try it on some of my colonies and see what happens. But anyway, he talks about what your brood will look like with your views Formic Pro and kind of what to expect. And he kind of explains it. And I asked him, I think, some pretty hard questions, and he answered them. And so, I don't recommend anyone use any product until you're educated on it, because it's always a risk. And so I just encourage you to go check that video out if it's something that you might want to do. I had always thought Formic Pro, you just couldn't use it in the South. I was really scared of it. I'd heard horror stories, but after talking to Tom, he is the North American rep for the company. And so who else better to ask about the product than him, because he knows all the science behind it, all the chemistry behind it. He's had to field a lot of tough questions over the years, and he's a believer. He uses it himself with his bees. He's got about 100 colonies, I think. So very interesting stuff. But that's kind of what's going on in my neck of the woods. Plus, we are just going wild down here. The bees are building up. And so that's one reason I thought it was a perfect time tonight to talk about swarms and splits, because I know that we're almost to March, and I know down here, I think my buddy Davis, I think, said he's already caught one swarm, but I haven't seen any swarms or heard of any yet right here, but he said he's caught one. And so it's happening here now. And it's interesting because in Ozark, which is about 20 miles, 15, 20 miles north of where I live, a week ago when Tom was here, we went through the colonies, and there was a lot of brood, but didn't see any drones, no drone cells, no queen cells, no nothing, but a lot of bees, a lot of brood. Yesterday we went through the bees at the farm. A friend of mine came over, a guy from the local bee club came over, and we went through some colonies at the farm, and we saw a few drones, a little bit of drone brood. But then I went down to Slocum, and if you see my community post on YouTube today, you'll see that we have some drones. And I did something yesterday that was crazy. I did do some splits, and I'm going to post a video here in the next day or two, and let me know what you think. I just kind of did it a little bit unconventional. I started off with one goal, and I ended up doing something completely different. And so if y'all get a chance to watch that video, let me know what you think. So Greg, that's the long answer to a short question there as to what's going on down here in Alabama. And just appreciate all you guys being on here. We've got, what do we have? 150 people on here right now, and that's awesome. We're just barely getting started with this thing.
Oh, look at that.
So did we lose Greg?
I think so. Yeah.
He'll be back on.
Yeah. Both of those videos, I commented on the video with Corey, and that is what people need to hear. Instead of just watching, every other video that's out there, claiming this and that. And, folks need to really pay attention to where they get the information. And when you're talking VSH, why not just go to a source like Corey? He has the background in it. He's got the education. He's been working with VSH for, gosh, I forget how many years. I mean, I watched the video, but that was great. And then the one with Tom about Formic, I mean, he said some good things there too, and it was, he made some valid points on it, but I mean, he said like the temperature concerns. So I would think if you're going to use Formic, um, do you think you would just do a test run in, like, maybe in your backyard, on
No,
those?
I think I'm going to go. I think the issue I have is most of my bees that are here now are testing within threshold. I mean, I haven't tested my backyard bees in a while, but they're testing within threshold for the most part. So the problem is the bees in California are going to come back with mites in there. And so
Yeah.
I that's where the problem is. That's going to be a month from now, or even maybe a little more than a month from now when they get back. And so, they're going to come back here. I'm interested to see how they're doing. They've had some weird weather out there this year. I hope they're okay when they come back. It's always a risk when you send them out there, but I'm gonna, I figure if they get back, if they're about ready to hit the trees when they get back, they're so packed out. A lot of them are, and so the Formic does shut the queen down for about a week, and it also, it does do some damage to some of the open brood, which if you're trying to grow right then, that's not necessarily a good thing. But
Right.
if you watch the video, see that Tom talks about how when you open that colony back up 2 weeks later, typically the queens are starting to lay back in a really nice pattern and the hives just explode. And so,
Yeah.
that's the scary thing is that, 7 days in, you open it up, it looks a little bit crazy, but then 2 weeks later, you open it up and supposedly things are better. So I'm thinking about using it with at least some of those pollination bees when they get back, if they're, the ones that are for sure strong enough. Hopefully they're all
Yeah.
strong enough, but that's my plan. And then we'll just see. I don't know what else to do. Honestly, I can hit them with oxalic acid, not the ferritic mites off, but what I really need to do is test them and see what the mite levels are.
Yeah.
But last year, I think the last couple of years, I think I've gotten hammered with mites because last year I didn't treat those pollination bees when they got back, and I lost quite a few of them. And I just really think that's the problem is I think the mites just grew, and we had a mite bomb. And people talk about, how the mites peak in the summertime. That doesn't have to be the case. The big fear is that what really happens, at least as I think has happened almost textbook in my case, is the mites have exploded. We harvest the honey, late June, early July, and that's when we're done with that. And at that same point in time, we go into a dearth. So the bees brood back, but the mites don't. And so the mites are all in there. And as you just basically end up with an explosion of mites,
Right.
which can absolutely weaken the bees and hammer down the colony. But I've learned something really talking to Ian and looking at some of the stuff he's doing. The goal is to knock them down in the spring, really knock them back strong and hard. And so they don't have a chance to grow and get big and strong by summer.
Right.
So then if they can come out of the honey flow, and whenever you pull the honey off, and have a low mite load, man, you're setting them up to really make some strong, powerful winter bees and for success. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I can really knock them back instead of just ignoring the problem in the spring or just thinking my bees look great and not treating, just going ahead and kind of doing that, just making sure the mite levels are low going into the honey flow. So I don't have to worry about just trying to catch up after, because by the time, by the time you pull that honey off, if the mites are really high, you've almost lost the battle because by then the viruses have been spread, the mites are crazy and so forth. But that's kind of what I'm going to do with that. We have Greg back here. Good to see you back, Greg. So let's go ahead and kind of dive into the topics tonight. Those are some things I'm going to do though this spring. They're a little bit different. We've kind of entertained the idea of a new, it's not really new, but we kind of coined the phrase and we've talked about it with some different people. We've talked about it quite a bit here, and I've actually added a playlist to my YouTube channel called Intentional Beekeeping, and that applies, in my opinion, in every aspect of beekeeping. And so, you've heard the term for years, sustainable beekeeping, very similar concept, intentional beekeeping. As you develop your skills and you become better at this craft, this art, so to speak, you begin to determine and decide what works best for you and how to be successful in what you're doing. And everything you do becomes a reason for it. Even if that reason is, I just want to get in my bees and see a queen or something like that, that's a reason to go in. But if you're just blindly going in, if you're banging your bees around, if you're just in them all the time, but you don't have any idea what you're doing or don't really have a plan, it's going to be, you're not going to have the same success as if you kind of learn, move forward, and do everything intentionally. And I've really learned this, I think, from both of you guys this year, because Brian, you had a lot of loss and really got down to no colonies, I think, for a while. And then you came back with a determined attitude to do things intentionally, right? I mean, to really grab onto the concepts and the philosophies that go along with beekeeping and follow a plan. And you've seen success with that. And obviously, Greg, going from, the sideliner status now to where it's your income for your family, you've had to do that as well. So, and that includes everything you do. It also includes how you're going to control your swarms, or try to limit swarms or manage your swarms, and how you're going to do your splits. There's so many ways to do all these things. And so tonight, maybe Brian and Greg, if we could kind of talk a little bit about that. I know down here we are right on the edge of swarm season. Some people, excuse me, got a little frog in my throat or something. But since we're ahead of the game, I'll talk a little bit about what's going on here and what my plans are with swarms. There are not a whole lot of things more entertaining and just you're in touch with those bees and with nature when you're catching a swarm. Those bees are up there in that tree, or they're flying all around you, and they're not usually super defensive or aggressive. They don't have anything to defend, and you can literally be one with the bees almost in that moment. And so it's so much fun to do that. And a lot of my stock actually has originated with swarms that I've caught either in traps or just hanging in a tree or a bush. But I'm starting to kind of change my thoughts on swarms a little bit, in that I'm wanting to develop bees that are less swarmy. First of all, I'm wanting to find bees that are less swarmy, and I'm wanting to be able to have a little bit more control over the genetics in my bees. And so that's kind of where I'm going. I'm going to try to limit maybe my swarm catches a little bit this year, and maybe try to limit my bees from swarming. And one way I'm going to do that possibly is by splitting maybe sooner, and kind of breaking the colonies down, moving the queen, maybe doing what they call some, is the word forced swarms or whatever it is, where you kind of take the queen and some frames of bees away. And you don't, you leave the queen cells back in the colony if you see them, or you create queen cells back there. And so when the queen is away with some bees, then she basically thinks she's swarmed, is the philosophy behind it, hoping that'll help decrease the swarmings that I have. And so though I love catching swarms, my goal this year is to kind of limit that a little bit, maybe not catch as many from calls, and try to keep my bees in the box a little better. Brian, what are your plans when it comes to swarms and swarm control?
I tell you, last year, your timing is just so crucial. It's just critical, because you got to learn how to read your hive. When you see the drones building up and you just see all of those certain signs, this year, I just have to watch, because I want to try and control my numbers, but with very strong colonies, therein lies a problem, so I don't want to lose any into the trees. And last year, basically what I did, as soon as I would see, I would watch my cups, and as soon as I would see any bit of action in those cups, when I would see cups, I would check my colonies more frequently, just because I knew that the hives were doing certain things. And this was me expanding last year. And as soon as I saw anything in a cup, they got split. And I did just that. I moved the queens up front, let them develop out. I dropped, mated queens in some. I smushed down cells and dropped in mated. And it worked out really well last year. That was expanding. This year, man, the hashtags are going to go crazy in a second. But this year, it's just, I need to decide because, I talked to Greg and I'm going to take a drive down to his place this weekend just to pick up some equipment. But it's how far I want to expand, and that's going to be it. I mean, do I stack them up and go for this massive honey crop? I just need to figure that all out. I kind of have a plan in my head. Um, I do have I got some early queens coming from Jose. I finalized that the other day. So I just got thinking, I'm like, I need to make a move and just get some very early because, and the only reason why I'm getting queens that super early in April is when we look outside, we've got, our red maples and there's different trees that are ready to pop. And I'm like, it's February. So all the signs are there that we're going to have an early season. So I just need to, yeah, like Sharon says, equalize as much as possible. I just need to be on top of it. And I I got to figure it out. I think I have everything figured out, but in all honesty, and it's just us three watching, so nobody else listening. In all honesty, I don't have it entirely figured out just yet. If I follow the plan of somewhat of like what I did last year, yeah, I could be at, now my one colony, it's just the little nuke. It's the 7 frame nuke. So, that colony, I really wouldn't split it out. I would just grow it. That's the Pepto Pink. So I really want to grow that just to see what she would do. Want those genetics in my apiary. The other 10, I could split those, go to 21 colonies, and the hashtags are going to start. You're going to see it in a second. I could have my 21 colonies, and, with that, I'm sure I would have a heck of a honey crop, building them up like I have and just following the course like I did last year. But we'll see. I might just try and stack some up, look at them and see which ones I can stack. And if I can keep the bees out of the trees, then I'm sure I'm going to have a heck of a honey harvest, but we'll see. I haven't quite decided. I need to decide by Sunday when I go down and visit Mr. Burns, so that I know what equipment I got to pick up. So, but yeah, it's just getting so close, and I need to make a move. Look at that. Bruce is muted.
Hey, Bruce, you probably need to unmute there. I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life there, but you might have to unmute your mic.
I'm trying to figure out how to share a darn screen here, y'all.
Nailed it.
Y'all be nice now. I'm just trying to, I'm
Hang on a second.
Let me start playing. Bruce.
Yeah, while we.
Dun, 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 dun,
I want to show y'all this.
Dun,
if I can figure this out. Hold on. That'll be nice. It's not working. Hold on. What did I do wrong? Never mind. Okay, let's don't do this right now.
I can tell you, me and Brian look a lot better when you minimize that screen like that.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm the one that looks a lot better then. Let me try this again. I want to show you something that I found yesterday. And dang, if I can get this figured out. Why is it not working?
Can you open it up in a window?
Okay, yeah, here we go. I see what I'm doing. All right, here we go. Let me try this. We'll see how it looks. Share. Oops, that's the wrong screen.
Well, I like that.
All right.
Well, at least it wasn't your bank financial statement wasn't up. That's good.
No, it's my bank financial statement. It's definitely not. Let me try it one more time, and if it doesn't work, then we're just going to move forward.
Text Brian.
Not sure why it's showing. Let me try this. This is it right here. Okay. So I think I've got some drones.
Good Lord, look at that. That's beautiful.
This was actually a frame that I got last year. We went down to Bay Minette down near Mobile, Alabama, and I was just in desperate need. And these frames were in the boxes, and it was old comb, foundationless comb that was in there, and a lot of it was kind of beginning to crumble away a little bit. So I just stuck some of these in the colonies, and the bees built them out. And this is when I put on this colony, actually kind of late in the year, just to give them some space and some room. And you can see what they've done with that comb. There may have been honey in there earlier, but now it's not honey anymore, it's drones. And so
Yeah.
this is what Slocum looks like. It seems like most of the colonies down there have a significant amount of drones. This colony doesn't have a ton of actual drones yet, but you can see there are plenty coming, like very soon. The other colony, which my next video that comes out will be actually another colony that was not quite at this point a couple of weeks ago, but near this point. So they're a little bit ahead. But how about that? That's what I'm seeing. And that isn't even green drone comb. That's just a perfect drone pattern, breed pattern on a little medium frame that's in that box. Isn't that awesome?
Looking good.
And this is actually a colony that's really a good colony. It's a nice colony, and I think they're pretty desirable traits. If I'm not mistaken, it was a swarm I caught last year. One of the few I actually caught in a tree. A friend of mine called me up, and I went and caught it. And I think that is the hive that these bees were in, and they did great last year. They blew up and got me a couple of supers of honey. Caught the swarm April 7th, and they're nice bees. I mean, they blew up, and you see what they're doing here. So, and it's pretty exciting. I hope they continue to grow and do well. And those are some genetics I wouldn't mind having. So anyway,
Yeah.
Greg, tell us your thoughts on swarms, swarm control. I know you split like crazy, but just tell me kind of what your strategy is or what you've heard of that may help some folks out.
Well, first, this is something that I can get awful fired up about. So I'm trying to calm myself down because I can feel it boiling
right now.
I can feel it boiling. And so I just have to ask you, have you all ever been to church and the preacher puts out the message and you feel like he's just thumping on you? Like, how does he know, how do you pick me out of everybody in this congregation to pick on me? That's how sometimes, when you needed to hear that message. So if you can give me a couple minutes here, I think I got to preach a little bit on splits because if you or somebody you love is suffering from anxiety, just hearing the word swarming and splitting, I want you to know that it's okay. I want you to know that you don't have to split. If you don't split, that doesn't mean your bees are not, or that doesn't mean your bees are going to swarm. Now, I've already said two things that is absolutely contrary to about 90% of the things that you're probably going to hear or read. And so I want to take just a minute or two to open up that can of worms and just run some folks through just some of the basics. If you have a colony from last year that was a last year queen, for the most part, most queen genetics, as they are coming through their first winter and coming out of the spring, they're going to start building up. They're going to do what bees do. And whether we're on top of their management or not, they typically have a higher inclination to want to swarm. That's their God-given nature, is to do that. Knowing that, we can use that to our advantage to either A, choose to split, or B, choose to hold them back. There's something to be said by being intentional, to use Bruce's word, with your colonies and your management to prevent swarms, but not making splits. That doesn't make any sense, right? That's not what you usually hear. Swarm prevention has to do with making splits, keeping them thin, okay? But here's something to think about. If you make those splits in April, and we make those splits in May, a lot of the times you are 100% going to miss out on having your max field force out in the field, gathering nectar, bringing them back, and making a honey crop. If your goal is to have colonies that are making honey and helping cash flow your operation, you might be in a little bit of trouble. I want to encourage folks to spend time thinking about what are your goals for your bees, not only in the spring, but this coming year, because there are several tremendous opportunities to requeen, diversify your genetics, do these things that you want to do and learn and grow in the bee yard, but you don't have to do them at the first of spring. Spend a little bit of time thinking about that, because if you spend that same amount of time getting into those colonies and making sure they've got room to move, she's got room to grow, you're knocking down queen cells, you're giving them room to expand, what you can have is a colony that's coming out of the wintertime, going into the spring, that will be a tremendous colony with a field force that can do all of the work, bringing back all the nectar, creating a honey crop, creating a cash flow that now gets you into June, gets you into July. You can pull your honey, you can put your treatments on, and then you can break those rascals down and start making those splits and let them cruise into the fall time. So it's a way that you can make the most out of the asset, which is the bee, and not putting them in a crippling position just because you think you're supposed to split in the spring because that's what you hear. There are so many opportunities to tune into the asset, which is the bees, to create a yield, keep them healthy, keep them clean, and keep them on a path of growth. If we just spend a little bit of time figuring out what we actually want out of that. That being said, when I go into my colonies that are going through the winter and coming out of the spring, yeah, a lot of those 100%, I'm starting to break them out. I'm starting to get them ready for splits. But one of the little known secrets about bees, and I intentionally do this, I monitor my queens right now going into the springtime, and I already have my eye on my breeders that I want to be grafting queens from, that I want people to have queens off of these mothers. They've already proven to be great last year. They've proven to get through the winter just fine. I'm watching their numbers. I'm watching how they build up coming into the spring. And a lot of my first rounds of splits on those is intentionally managing that swarm tendency and letting them put those queen cells on. And what I find a lot of the time is that now she is going into her second year coming out of the springtime, they will put a bazillion queen cells on. And I let them. I'll go ahead and I'll cut those queen cells out. And then I will split that colony at that time, knowing that those bees made the perfect queens at the most opportune, perfect time in the colony. Now those queens are going out in my yard and are part of my mating program for the next following year. Now I can watch them make the most perfect, most beautiful queens of the year at the most beautiful opportune time. And now I can cruise and I can watch them through. There are so many different ways to achieve your goals if you spend a little bit of time figuring out, well, what are my goals here to do? If it's making the most amount of numbers up front early in the year, well, then you might go ahead and split the tar out of your colonies. If you're trying to build and grow your bee yard, diversify your genetics, isolate genetics, trial genetics, you might not want to get these rascals spread out so thin because they might not have time to build a healthy of enough drone population to where you can see what these crosses are going to do or how these drones are going to perform. So don't sell yourself short. Don't be too eager to make those splits too soon just because you hear everyone talking about swarms and splits. Don't get afraid and don't get too anxious because there is always more than one way to pluck the chicken.
Greg, question for you. What would be your strategy for folks that, you mentioned a little bit about this, but to keep the bees in the box in the springtime, if honey production is their main goal? I know a lot of beekeepers that probably is, especially, well, really of any category, but especially like hobby beekeepers many times just want to have, hashtag, 11 or 15 or 20 colonies or 5 colonies. So what would be your recommendations to folks like that don't want to grow their numbers in order to help prevent swarming? Like you mentioned, swarming is a natural tendency of bees. What are some of the things that they can do to help, maybe the first couple of years, but as time goes on, to keep their bees in the box, to help just stay at a certain number of colonies if that's all they want to do?
At some point, you have to get over that, and you have to understand that if you are doing everything right, those bees are going to grow faster than you really want to do anything with, and you will be in a position where it's an ATM machine spitting out 20s constantly. And once you say my pockets are full, this is too much, you have to do something about it so you can thin that asset down because it just continues to grow. Well, how do you go about doing it? It's going to be a lot different. This is where there's also a lot of nuance too. And if you start looking into what Italians do or what Russians do or what Carnies do or what Caucasians do, this is where beekeeping gets really fun. And this is where you can start to tune in your goals for what you can start tuning in your genetics to what your goals do. We have really pushed hard towards Caucasian because they are just less flighty. They don't want to swarm nearly as fast as an Italian or a Saskatraz. So there's opportunities to start to guide your genetics a certain direction to get some of those benefits that you're looking for. But for the beginning beekeeper, Bruce, who's getting into it, and they are so happy because they've got their bees getting through the winter, they're coming out of the spring. Primarily, what they're afraid of is are my bees going to swarm? Am I going to lose them? Are they going to end up in the trees? What do I do to stop it? Sure. If you take doubles coming out of the spring and you just split those 2 boxes, and the one that's queenless, you add a queen too, after a couple days or a week after you knock down all those cells, yeah, that's going to really slow them down. And that's going to help them. That's going to help prevent them from swarming. But you've just acted on their nature. One thing that I recommend, and everyone's, if we look in the comments here, half the people are going to say I'm nuts and I'm crazy, and half the people are going to say it totally works. But if we were intentional with our swarm prevention from the very beginning of the season, and we're inside of that brood chamber, and we're giving her plenty of places to lay, and we're on top of that, we're giving the bees places above that to start storing away nectar, that surplus and that honey, we can 100% have that colony continue to cruise and build. Bruce, I'm terrible with names. You had a great guest on last year who is like the tower hive guy, right? And he has like a bazillion colonies tall. What was his name?
Well,
Randall.
we talked about it. Yeah, Randall Carter.
Randall. Yeah. He's probably not on tonight, but this would be an excellent question for Randall. How do you get 18 boxes tall without them swarming? Right? There is a certain management to managing large colonies to have high production.
I've actually done a little bit of that myself. Years ago, and we've mentioned the name on here a few times. A fellow named Tim Ives up in Indiana. He manages those big colonies like that. He actually runs a 3 deep system, and he's just developed a line of bees that can do that. I think he started off getting just large cutouts, feral colonies up there in that area, and he manages them in such a way that the bees do whatever they can do. And so his idea is to really, he calls it the hoarding, I guess the hoarding instinct of the bees. Number one, he gives them places to build wax because that's one thing that they want to do. And number two, he gives them comb to build honey, which is that hoarding instinct. And he allows the bees in the bottom 3 boxes to really just kind of do whatever they want to do. And so he overwinters them that way. And then above that, he'll add comb and so forth just to keep the bees busy. The idea is to keep them busy, and that can help reduce some of that swarming. So the problem is, I had one colony that I stacked. It was 11 boxes tall or 12 boxes tall, and I got 315 pounds of honey here in Alabama, where the average honey yield is about 50 to 60 pounds. And I did exactly his system. So I thought, man, I got this thing figured out. I had to get up on a ladder to pull the boxes down. I mean, it was ridiculous. It took like 45 minutes to go through a colony just because it was so much. And I've got some old videos from back in 2015, and I didn't know what I was doing. I held the camera vertical, and I would just be up there just doing whatever. That was before I was just kind of messing with YouTube a little bit. Didn't have any idea what I was doing, but those videos are pretty impressive. And people would say there's no way that there's actually honey in those boxes, but I break them down. Sure enough, they would have capped honey throughout that entire stack of boxes. I called it the mega hive. That was the nickname for it. Randall, I think he probably does a similar thing. There are different ways you can checkerboard. Tim's concept is you checkerboard boxes, not you checkerboard. What is it? You put the whole box of either foundation or comb. You don't checkerboard within each box. And so he said you checkerboard boxes, not frames, is what he said. But it's a unique way to do it, and people just trash him over that. They say you can't do that, you can't do that, but then he'll show you a picture where he is doing it. And so it's one of those things that I don't recommend necessarily that people follow that system. But from Tim, I learned what my strategy with honey production is. You stay ahead of the bees enough to allow them to have room and space. You give them things to do with the hoarding and the wax building in mind. They have to have work to do. The wax builders have to have a place to build wax. The honey processing bees have to have a place to put that honey. When the nectar comes in, they've got to have something to do with it, and they're going to be bringing it in. They don't quit bringing it in. If there's a flow, they're going to bring it in. And so the bees have to have a place to do that and to stay busy. And so the idea is that, you see my colonies, and they're kind of especially my production colonies are just a mishmash of different sizes because each colony is a little bit different. And so I just try to stay ahead of them a box or two and just kind of keep growing them and building them. But I don't want them to get too far ahead of the bees, because then you have issues down here with the hive beetles, pests, and things like that can get in there, and it just becomes a problem. And so that's a skill I've kind of developed over the years. But this time of the year right now here in Alabama, March, April particularly, it's just everything is ramping up so fast. Like you have so many bees, there's population grows so fast that it's almost it's a it's a it's a trick. It's a tricky thing to do to figure out how much to put on when, because if you put too much on, once again, the temperature gets cold sometimes. It's just difficult to do, and there's an art to it to figure it out. And I'm sure it's different in every single geographical location. Even like I was saying earlier, right here, right now, mid-February here in Southeast Alabama, in Ozark, they're brooding up. But there were no drones a week ago. But then Slocum, you saw that picture I put up of entire frames of drone brood, drones everywhere, just 30 miles apart, north to south, 25 to 30 miles apart. And so it's just really a trick to do that. But as far as swarm prevention, I know people say, give them some space, checkerboard in some frames, maybe some comb where that queen will have a place to lay. Just give them some space to do it. But in the spring in perfect conditions, there are some colonies that are just going to swarm. It just is how it is. I don't worry too much about it. If my colonies swarm, it doesn't bother me too much, because I know that most of the time, 80-90% of the time, that colony is going to requeen themselves with a nice new queen that they have chosen, and many times, if it's early spring, they almost don't skip a beat. You'll go in there and you'll see a brand new queen, either virgin or just she's starting to lay, and you'll be like, oh my gosh. But the population doesn't look, even though they've lost half the bees, it actually looks more, it looks better. The colony looks better because they just had almost too many bees packed in there. And I found that especially the early prime swarms, if they don't keep swarming and swarming and swarming, many times those colonies just really, it's like they gain some traction and momentum, and you can't slow them down. They just explode and produce a lot of honey. And so people really worry about it. I don't worry as much about it. Of course, I do have quite a few colonies. If I just had one or two, it would be different. But with, if I go back to a bee yard and I can tell some of them have swarmed, it's not a huge deal to me. I don't get too concerned about it. I try to prevent it either by splitting or stacking or whatever. But if they swarm, I just figure, you know what? It's just bees being bees, and you just got to roll with it. Another thing that I think is interesting, guys, and Greg, you may have mentioned this a little bit, maybe this is a trait of the Caucasians that you're dealing with, is, I didn't really understand this before talking to Gus Mitchell, and even I've seen Cayman talk about it, that you really can, some people will kind of laugh at you when you say this, like we've talked about, but there are some strains of bees, there are some hives that are just much less swarmy. If that makes sense. They have a less of a tendency to swarm. Mm-hmm. Talk about your Caucasians a little bit, Greg, and the swarm tendency with them. Kind of what do you find with those bees genetically?
That's a great question, Bruce, and it ties into something that I'm burning to talk about too. Why we like the Caucasians so well, and why the blend that we've taken that heavy Caucasian influence.
Oh no.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we're losing Greg.
Oh boy. Uh-oh.
Well,
we lost him.
We'll carry on.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, thanks, guys. I've noticed a couple of super chats coming in, or super stickers. I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. We'll remind Greg where he is when he comes back, Brian, and we'll readdress that. What about you, Brian? What are some thoughts you have on the swarmy nature of bees, or on the genetic aspect of that?
I'm trying to get that out of my apiary. I've got one colony that last year I noticed that they had more of that tendency than all of the others. My management and everything was the same across the board. It's just that they were flying out into a fruit tree, and I would check them, and everything looked okay. And then the farmer guy would call me up, and he'd be like, "Kid, we got a problem over here." And I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Got a big old bunch of them bees hanging up in that tree again." And I'm like, man, and I knew which hive they were coming from. I'm trying to get that out of there, just because I don't want that in there, and it does seem like certain bees just like that. They have that tendency. So I'm trying to get rid of that. That way I don't have to put much work into the swarm management. Um, we'll see. The Caucasians, like Greg was saying, they don't seem as flighty. I've got, I think, 3 of my 11 have Caucasian genetics in them. So we'll see how they do this year. I know basically all 3 of them, they're in my back row at the main apiary. So we'll see how they do. I'll probably manage them pretty much close to about the same as what I did last year, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, my first exposure to the fact that, hey, it's maybe not always the best idea to try to grow your apiary by catching swarms is when we talked to Gus Mitchell last year. And he was like, excuse me, he was like, well, I'm going to have a different take on this because, most people just think, and there's nothing wrong with catching swarms if that's what you want to do. And it's so much fun, but he's like, I want to kind of have a breed of bees that doesn't have swarms. And then I watched Cayman Reynolds, a video somewhere I think, I've watched so many videos, but sometime last year, and he was really trying to breed heavily towards bees that are have less of a tendency to swarm. And so, it's something I've thought a lot about, and it's interesting. And not to say I'm not going to catch swarms. I had one of my colonies in my backyard last year. They were growing up great. And this colony had originated, of course, from a swarm the previous year. And I only had, I think, 4 or 5 swarms in my backyard, but I ended up with like 16 swarms or some crazy amount of bees in my backyard swarming. And most of those, that one colony just kept swarming out. Like it was swarm and swarm and swarm and swarm and swarm. Like I think I had 3 or 4 swarms in the bush in front of that colony one day. I got home from work, and just some of them, by the time it was done, they were like the size of a baseball. I mean, tiny little swarms. And I'm like, man, what on earth? And so it basically swarmed out. Like it was just ridiculous. And I don't want that. I can't stand those I don't mind a prime swarm, but I just hate it when they keep swarming one after the other. It just drives me. It just drives me nuts. All right, Greg.
Greg, the show's yours.
We held the fort down for you. So carry on with your thought about the Caucasians and the swarmy nature.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you can hear me okay. If not, we'll have to try again. It's just one of those nights with technology. But can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you. Perfect.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. So what's interesting is we're talking a little bit about how different genetics kind of do different things. And it's for some folks, they say that that's nonsense. But if we look at other species in the animal kingdom, if we're taking just for folks who do any hunting, especially upland birds, if you take a German short-haired pointer out in the field, those dogs point, they honor, that's where their strong suits are. They're not necessarily great flushers unless they're poor pointers. You have some dogs like labs, which don't really point, but they flush and they find the birds, and they do that great. And that's a certain technique and a method that they do that. You take something like a Springer Spaniel, where they're bouncy, they're jumpy, they're flushy. Same thing happens with queens. Certain queens are a little better at certain jobs than others. And like Bruce, you had a great interview with Corey Stevens, and Corey's famous for saying, VSH is an additive. It's an attribute. With every pro, there's a con. And the same thing happens with Italians, Russians, Saskatraz, Buckfast, Carniolan, and Caucasian. But what's interesting with the Caucasian is when we brought the Caucasian line up and then started mixing those with our heavy Carney line, bringing those two, the northern and the southern Appalachian mutts together. What's beautiful about the Caucasians is they are frugal going into the wintertime. They can cruise with very little resources, but it's almost as though they are more in tune with their environment, and they don't start brooding up too early. They almost wait until everything is just right. If you compare them with an Italian or a Saskatraz, they're going to be a little bit behind coming out of the first part of spring. And while the Italians might, ebb and flow, try to brood up, have the brood pulled out, they keep trying to get that start going. Well, the Caucasians, they just wait a little bit. What's interesting about that is when it comes time for those Caucasians to get jammed packed, and to start to actually have that swarm tendency kick in, they also are a little bit more reserved on when they start that. That's a really big deal for not only folks who I think are raising honey, but for anybody who, if you've ever had genetics that just, if you look at them wrong, they want to start putting queen cells on. I think that's where the Caucasians shine. They're just a little bit more frugal and more reserved on making those decisions. And so that, I think for me, that's really important. And I play to that. And this kind of ties into what we talked about just a little bit ago about not necessarily being in a hurry to make splits unless it is for a specific purpose. But what's interesting, you take a first-year queen, no matter the race, and you try to crowd that box out and try to get them to make those queen cells. A lot of times it's pretty tough. But that same queen going through the winter, coming out of the spring, they are way more apt to start to put on queen cells and actually get that swarm in place and going. The Caucasians are just a little bit more reserved. They don't do that quite as early or as soon. And I like that because Caucasians they create a buffer for a lot of the things that we need a buffer in. I need a buffer going into the wintertime where I need these bees to be more frugal with their resources. I need that buffer coming out of the spring that they're not quite so excited and hot and heavy brooding up. And more importantly, they're not so hot and heavy and excited to put queen cells on. But that being said, it's also a neat idea to not necessarily split those colonies out in the spring, like we talked about earlier. Try to manage the swarm, whether it's your checkerboarding boxes or your checkerboarding frames. You're going through, you're cutting down your cells, you're smushing them, you're giving them room to lay and keep going, get that honey flow. And then it creates a nice opportunity still before it gets too hot to put some, if you did want to think about putting formic or a treatment on after you're pulling your supers, you have a lot more opportunity at that time frame in Ohio than you do waiting until the end of July or going into August time. Where that's beneficial is if there's a risk for the treatment to harm the queen, prevent her from laying, or cause any kind of long-term issues with her. It's not that it's not that it doesn't matter, but if you start thinking about employing a later queening cycle, if that does happen and you are putting your treatments on and you do have queen mortality and you have queen loss, that's a way less of an issue after you've pulled your honey than it is before. So it gives you another option to not only cash flow, create a crop early on in the season. It gives you the opportunity to go ahead, if you do want to split them out, make those brood breaks as the incoming pollen and nectar are slowing down, makes your treatments a lot more effective, and then think about requeening at that time of year. And so whether it's you're using different genetics to achieve these things, different styles and methods of splits, there's so many different ways to go about that. And so rather than me talk all night about that, Bruce, I wondered maybe they'll throw a question right back at you is why should folks consider making splits at all? Like what do folks who are intentional with their beekeeping, where does making splits come into play? I think if folks better understand why beekeepers split, then the how and the when, I think, is a lot more easier to understand.
Yeah, man, that's a that's a great question. I've never really thought of it like that before. There's so many reasons. I think, of course, the number one reason I think would be to grow your apiary, to increase your numbers. If that's really what you want to do, the best way to do that is by splitting, obviously, right? Either if you want to spend money and buy more bees, or you can split your bees. Of course, you can catch swarms, and there are many ways to grow your numbers. But splits is by far the most, I think, economical and I would say easiest way to increase your numbers. So I would say that is probably the number one reason why why most people split their bees. Another reason I think they do it is with the thought of preventing swarms. They go into a colony in spring and they see all those queen cells and they think, well, this actually happened to me yesterday. So the next video coming out, I'll address this a little bit. And I've been second guessing myself a little bit, but you open up a colony, you see some queen cells in there in the spring, and you think, well, they're in swarm mode. So I'm going to pull the queen out with a couple of frames in there with some bees, and then I'm going to separate those queen cells out and basically create a swarm for the bees, an artificial swarm. And then hopefully I'll have some splits and I'll have some nice colonies and the queen won't swarm. That's another reason. I don't know, Greg. I'm going to throw it back at you. What's your answer on that? One thing before we move on, though, I do want to say, you mentioned something there that I think a lot of people never consider, and I've only considered it recently, about the benefits of, number one, doing splits later in the year if you can, and number two, using, I would say, late season queens. I'd never really thought about that, but I've heard you talking about it. I've heard many people talking about it recently, the later in the summer queens, and I've actually had pretty good success doing that. I bought some of those queens out of desperation, but they end up being some really nice queens sometimes.
Right.
The ones, another issue with that, though, is a lot of queen breeders quit selling queens late in the year, maybe because they're keeping all those queens themselves. I don't know, but a lot of them just quit. You can't find them from a lot of queen breeders after June or whenever it is, and so it makes it tough. But those are a couple of reasons I could think of why people split. I know you have a theme or a thought pattern here. Tell us what you think, Greg.
Before I open up that can of worms and start waxing philosophically from the pulpit, maybe Brian can chime in and let's get his 2 cents on why is Brian splitting in April or May and using mated queens to do it?
The whole reason is the hashtags are going to start. I just want to expand out just a hair, and that's it.
Oh, so now you want to expand?
Well, just
just a little.
Hold it back just enough.
Just a little bit. I don't have a whole ton coming. It's just a couple. I don't order any bit like Brian on here. Flower Street. I saw he's got 30 coming. Look at this. See, I knew the hashtags are going to come, but I'm just going to expand a little bit.
Brian.
For me, though, the splits and then dropping mated, I look at our season in that, yeah, I could split them, let them raise their own queen, but you lose a certain amount of time. And the time, especially like at that time of the year, it's critical. So I don't want to lose 3 weeks time, even if that's on the short end of it. I don't want to lose that time with them going through and, raising up a queen, her going out and getting mated. I've had problems in my area in prior years with dragonflies and other issues where I just had, the percentage of queens that ended up making it was very low. So that's why I have those coming. And then the splitting, it's purely to expand a little bit. Now, what I'm also thinking is this, even if, like I said in my last video, I said 15, if I end up with 17 or 18, I think where I probably will be, and then I might do just a handful of nukes just so I can learn that. But that's all of what I'm thinking. I can learn a new skill, building great nukes, so that I can maybe supplement, the funds coming into my apiary through that. So that's where I'm kind of looking. It's not, I'm not going to expand to a sideliner. My splitting at that time of the year is just so that, and it's almost, if you think about it, I'll have a buffer. If I have a colony that's a little weaker, well, I can just equalize things out, pinch that queen out, and I have colonies that I can just combine. So,
yeah.
Brian, I hear you. I see you, but you're a closet sideliner. You really, I know what you're doing. This is a slippery slope, Brian. It starts off as I'm just going to order some early queens in April. I'm just going to split these extra bees off. And now, wow, that was easy. Now I've got these extra 5, 6, 10 nukes laying around. Oh boy. And now all of a sudden I can go to here. I can go to there. What's interesting to think about is, I hate to answer a question with a question, but when we say why split, maybe the question could also be, well, why not split? Or why split? Maybe why should I not split? there's so many opportunities if we think about when you talk about splitting and bees are getting, let's say if someone poses, if their answer is, well, I'm splitting because I don't want these colonies to be this big. Okay, cool. Like maybe they don't want to manage boxes that are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 boxes tall, and they only want to manage a single box. Totally cool. But here's the problem with that. If you split that rascal out in the earlier season, now you're going to be 2 boxes that you have to maintain, stay on top of. It's going to create more work, more opportunities to try to figure out what's going on. And then here's a news flash. Those things are also going to build and get big. The tricky thing with bees is that if you do it right, they keep growing at a rate that's faster maybe than what you want to do with. So the question that I ask for folks who are, whether you're anxious about making splits, whether you are gung-ho and you want to make all the splits in the world, or there are some folks out there who don't make splits. They let the bees every spring swarm. Whatever's left in the box, they cruise through, and that's what they work with. My question to folks is, what are your goals for those bees, number one? And number two, what size configuration, how many boxes of bees do you need to achieve your goal, right? If you are saying, I want to produce a honey crop this year, I'm just going to throw it out there. You're not going to be stacking 3-frame nukes on top of themselves and create a barrel of honey, right? That's probably not going to happen. If your goal is, I want to make a bunch of splits, if your goal is, I want to push myself and see how lean I can make these splits and get them through the entire season and then go into the wintertime because I'm in an increase mode, cool. That's also a completely different way to go about that. So if you spend time on that thing that everyone hates to ask themselves, but why? When you keep chasing yourself, why? Well, why do I want to do that? Well, I want to make more splits. Well, why? Well, because I want to grow my bee yard. Well, why? Then it starts to get a little bit sketchy, and you have to really be honest with yourself. Well, why do I want to grow my bee yard? Well, because I want to be hashtag Brian50, or I want to be hashtag Brian51, or I want to be hashtag Johnny48. So that's a real thing. Beekeepers can be competitive, even in your own friend circles, and folks want to they want to perform. They sometimes want to outperform. Outside of all of that, there are so many ways to make those splits that are appropriate to whatever your goals and your actual need in the bee yard is. And we can talk about that tonight too, Bruce. The different ways of making these splits that align with whatever your goals are in the year. But the last thing I have to throw out before I forget, because it has been absolutely gold for us. And I'm going to go back just real quick. I'm going to go back in time into a truck, traveling late at night with Bob Benny. And Bob's asking me about my overwintering strategy. And I'm talking to Bob and I'm telling him I can get these really small colonies through the wintertime up north. And he asked me, and he says, "You're making late queens, aren't you, Greg?" And I said, "That's exactly what I'm doing. We make those queens at solstice. We let them build up in these mating nukes. We try to make as many of those as possible because it also gives us an opportunity to sell folks queens late in the year. If their treatments fail, if their splits fail, if something else happens, if it goes wrong, we have queens on hand. When Susie caps me and says no more queens, then all the queens that are left, I use up for myself. And those are going to just requeening this, making that nuke box that is going to go through the wintertime. But there is tremendous opportunities to make queens late in the year. The problem, the trouble, the challenge with that is it's a very hard technique to master. It is very easy to make bees and make queens early in the season when you can do no wrong and everyone gets excited and you can make hundreds and thousands of queens. That really isn't a big challenge. But when you start getting towards July 4th, getting into August, and then for sure September, it's a completely different situation altogether. And so it's a much harder technique. So the big reason why you don't see a lot of guys selling queens late in the year is, number one, it's probably not worth their time to be chasing those few queens for all the extra effort. So that's one of the big reasons why. If you're working with a northern queen breeder, they have a little bit more opportunities to do that because their weather is a little bit more balanced. If you get down into South Georgia or Bruce, down in your neck of the woods, or anywhere in Florida in August, I mean, it gets so hot. If it starts to get dry, you start to get pests, you start to get robbing. those situations where normally it's okay for you to make queens, especially with small numbers and small colonies, you probably can't get by with there. So there is a magic season where it's easy to make queens earlier in the year, but there's something to be said about making those solstice queens. They just cruise through the wintertime. And here's the gold nugget. Those queens are less flighty no matter what their genetic is coming out of the springtime. And that's a big deal. You take a queen that you bought that's mated in March or April, and you make that split then, that queen will be very much wanting to swarm and have that colony put on cells that same time the following year. But if you can offset that a little bit later in the year, you also buy yourself a little bit of time. And here's where this is important. All these things are tied together. Splits aren't their own separate entity as pulling honey. It's not separate from your treatment program. Everything is together and is one big circle, and it all feeds each other. And it is all a timeline and a time frame that works together when you think of it like that. When you start thinking about making later queens, it gives you the opportunity to go ahead and put those treatments on just ahead of time. Your backup plan is you're requeening anyways. You're already making those splits. Now you have queens that are going into the fall, into the winter, way fresher. They tend to overwinter much better. And then when they come out of the spring, they're less flighty. They're less swarmy. That's a huge net win no matter which way you cut it. You better stop me there, Bruce, because I'll just keep going.
That's some great stuff there, and it's a lot to unpack. I did want to, before we move on, I was going to do this at the hour mark, but it's just, man, we've got 247 people according to what my computer says here, which that's got to be close to except for like our anniversary ones when we're giving a lot of stuff away, that's got to be close to a record for us with just 3 of us. So this movement, the Hive Life / Stream Team, the community we're having here is awesome. We appreciate everyone being on here. There's no way we've been able to address everyone's comments, but we see them and we appreciate it. I would also say that if you we do have some super chats and things enabled if you feel like in your heart to do that. But I did want to also talk about one reason I think it's a huge advantage to have those younger queens. And that was one of my goals going into last year, was to decrease the average age of queens in my apiary. I know some people requeen every colony every year, and I just haven't got to the point where logistically I've been able to do that or figure out how to do that from a cost standpoint and everything else. I do know that we've been doing a lot of splits with cells in recent years, which is a lot more affordable, obviously. And then you can mate them with your local stock, but still, if you really want to change, this is my theory, I think it holds true. If you really want to change the genetics and the attitude of your bees, you have to bring in some mated queens from somewhere else. If I see bees that act a certain way, there's no way you're going to guarantee that your bees are going to be able to develop those same traits unless you do kind of bring in some outside genetics. And so what my goal is to, through doing splits, through introducing new stock and new queens, including yours, Greg, into my apiary, into my operation, I'm trying to develop a South Alabama genetics that are calm, that are productive, and have, desirable traits. Because I do, in the future, one of my goals, we talk about being intentional, is to get maybe more into the queen breeding, queen rearing type stuff. And so maybe sell some nukes and things like that. And I don't want to sell junk. That's my concern. Mm-hmm. I don't want to sell junk to people. I want them to be able to buy my bees and feel like they have received a good deal, and that, there's no guarantee when you sell bees or buy bees, but I want mine to have a really good chance of survival and being a nice bee to work with. I just want people to be able to get into them and not feel like they're being chased all over the place. And I got to be honest, I've been in my bees the last couple of weeks a little bit, and overall the average attitude has been much better. I still have a few that are a little bit spicy, but nothing like last year at this time. My bees were just running me out of the bee yard. They were so crazy and feisty. This year, they have not been as bad. It seems like they're just overall doing better. And we do have to remember, Greg, you brought those queens down July 29th. Right. And those are the queen. Now, I'm sure that some of my other bees may have superseded after that. I don't know if they did or not, but, that's introduced some basic genetics into a couple of my bee yards that weren't there before. Yeah, one day, Brian. I don't know if I'm ever going to have the guts to do that, but maybe. Who knows? That would be my goal. If I can listen, if you find a beekeeper in Alabama doing bees in shorts, at least this part of the state, then that's doing something. Because I think most of the bees around here have a little bit of defensiveness to them. Another thing, Greg, you mentioned the difficulty with raising queens in the summertime here in the South. You were here in July, the miserable, hot, humid weather,
Nasty.
and there is nothing coming in. Like there are no resources. There may be a little pollen here or there, but basically they are in a dearth here in Southeast Alabama, in a basic dearth from about early to mid-July, really through into late August, September. And if you have a good fall flow, it gets a little better then. But we have a couple of months of just misery for people and for bees. And so, what I think happens too is the drone population goes down. Everything just kind of gets in survival mode for those couple of months right in the middle of summer. So it would be extremely difficult, I would think, to actually raise queens during that time. But I will tell you too, that if you have bees in an area where there's cotton or where there are, a good fall flow coming in, they'll start making drones again in September, October. So you can almost do some splits and make some queens then. It's a risk, I think, but you can do it. And so my mind is, in the past year, since I've known you guys and all the great people in these comments and the hive life concepts in my brain, my mind has really changed as far as a lot of the techniques and things I'm trying to do. And I appreciate all the guidance from you guys and from the folks in this comment section here. I see people here locally that have been doing it the same way for years and years. And you don't have to do it the same way. You can change and improve on what you're doing. And I think I'm maybe beginning to be able to figure some of that out. And it's because of you guys in the comments in this section. Greg, you hit on something earlier about how to do splits. And that's kind of, maybe we could spend some time on that. We're already an hour and 15 minutes in with 244 people watching. So maybe you guys could talk a little bit on split techniques. Now, there are as many, you mentioned earlier, this is a term I've heard, and I've heard different numbers thrown out, but the phrase I use, if you ask 5 beekeepers a question, you get 10 answers. I mean, you always are going to get multiple answers because people, we've all done different things. We've all done it different ways. I've got 2 or 3 different methods of splitting or more that work. And so, I guess maybe we could start. Maybe Greg, you could address kind of how you do your splits typically, your favorite type of splits. Obviously, you're doing a lot of things, raising queens and nukes and things like that, but kind of walk us through what your favorite kind of split is. And then Brian, in your case, as a hobbyist, kind of how would you do a split? What are your thoughts on that? So Greg, why don't you walk us through how you'd approach that?
Well, you'll hear me say it. Brian can finish my statement, but context is
key.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are in a mode of when we're making splits, we're typically doing we have a couple different uses for those bees. Sometimes we will go into a production colony where it might be doubles or triples. And I will take a yard that's of pallets, and I will go through and I will dig, and I will just, it's a dig. I'm pulling every frame of brood and every frame of honey out of those production colonies. And those are going into my mating boxes, which are 10 frame boxes divided 3 ways. And I'm adding a brood, a food, and then a fresh frame. And I'm doing that until all my boxes are full. Those boxes go to a different part of the yard or a different yard altogether. And then those are all going to receive queen cells that I just grafted. That's how I do it when I'm making queens or I'm making nukes for the springtime primarily. As the season kind of unfolds, there's different ways to split based on what your goals are. For the regular beginning beekeeper, they are not going to do that, and they probably shouldn't do that because it definitely takes a little bit of an eye and a touch and knowing how long it's going to take those bees to hatch, when they're going to be a field force, when they're going to be self-sustaining. You could simply take a frame of brood that has nurse bees on it, shake them into a styrofoam mini box, put a little feed in there, drop a queen cell in there, just enough that they can keep them fed and keep that queen cell warm. She'll hatch, she'll emerge, she'll go on a flight, she'll come back, she'll start laying. how well she lays and the kind of quality queen she's going to be, a lot of that is based on the environment that we put that cell into. So that being said, we're making queens, we're looking at making those splits for different reasons. And if we are going to go ahead and make that split just to raise queens, I want to do that in a way to where that division or that little nucleus colony inside of that box is self-sustaining, because I ain't got time to be shaking bees constantly and recharging these boxes. I ain't got time to keep babysitting them and adding feed to every single colony. I don't have that kind of time. So what I want to do is make more conservative splits, a little bit larger splits where the vibe, the essence, the vibrancy of that colony is a little bit stronger. They're a little further along. They're not only are they a little more self-sustaining, but they're resilient, especially when we get into times where we get excessive rain, excessive heat, excessive drought. I don't have to worry about them so much. If you get into the habit of making your splits too lean, you're going to lose sleep. Because if you make that one frame split and there's not a lot of bees there and there's not a lot of coverage on that queen and there's not a lot of food on there, what's going to happen is when we go through that rain event and it takes those plants 2 days to recharge, to start pumping out nectar again, guess what's going to happen? Everybody else out in that yard still has to eat. All those neighboring bees or even wild bees in your area still have to eat. Now those little weak colonies are now prime targets. Those are the first ones that get robbed out, and then you start moving backwards. Now you're losing. Not only are you losing the queen cell and you're losing that asset and that resource, you're losing the time you just spent to do that. So there's something to be said about sizing your split to whatever your goal for the split is. If it's simply to break a large colony down in the spring of the year, then think about making very large conservative splits, splitting boxes out, right, to where it's 5 to 10 frames of bees per split. It's a beautiful way, and those things catch up and can be prolific and can be productive. If your goal is to make numbers early in the year to build up to go to the wintertime, think about making large splits. The five full frames of bees and food and resources into a 10 frame box with fresh frames. Okay, we have made at this point hundreds, maybe even thousands of splits that were literally 1 or 2 frames of bees or a handful of bees in a queen cell. They all work at certain times based on what your needs are, what the weather patterns are going to do. That being said, one of my easiest, most fail-proof ways to make splits sometimes can be extremely contrary to what you'll see in here. But we make an enormous amount of queens and nukes and splits all in the same yard. And one of the easiest ways to do that is when you're raising bees in 5-frame nukes and you're stacking one 5-framer on top of the other, you let those rascals build up. When you have 2 boxes of bees, you find the queen and the box that she's in. I can move that 1 foot to the left, 1 foot to the right, 1 hive stand in front, 1 hive stand in the back. I can move it 2 miles. It doesn't matter, but the most of the bees are going to stay with mama in that box, and they're good to go. Everybody else is going to stay home in that original position where they have been their entire knowingness. They're going to keep flying back in that box. They know within minutes that they have no queen. A lot of times I can drop a queen cell right in that box, immediately close the lid, and they're good to go. Next thing you know, and 2 days later, that queen's going to hatch, going to go on a mating flight. She's going to come back. It's a fast way to jumpstart that particular colony. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, but simply just splitting those doubles and moving the queen and that colony to a new position. It doesn't matter where it's at. It can be in that same yard, leaving everybody else behind. If you want to let them go queenless for 7 days, you go back in, you check for queen cells, you knock every queen cell down. They take anything you give them. But you got to be careful is if you wait 2 days to go do that, and you're not careful, that first day they decide to make a new queen, if you're not looking and there's bee coverage, you can't see them drawing out that larva. You just can't see it. Day 2, you can see it. Day 5, after it's a larva, you do start to see it. So around day 8 of that process, you can start to, okay, well, now we have a capped queen cell. So it's really easy to just let them get to the point, wait 7 days, 8 days. When it's capped, decide what you're going to do with those. If Brian starts seeing capped queen cells there, with this closet sideline behavior that I'm picking up on,
Closet.
he's gonna start pulling a Burns, and he's gonna start putting one frame splits out there, and it's gonna be Brian 250 next year. So anyway, those are just a couple of ways that I really like that work great. And a simple way, you've heard it over and over and over again, is there's a fancy name for it. I think it's a Snellgrove. I think was maybe one of the originators of it, but a double screen board is absolutely so easy to do. If you take a colony that's in doubles, and you put this double screen board in between the two, which is really just another bottom board, that you reverse the entrance and the opposite location, and then in that bottom board, you have holes cut out and screens so they can still communicate. They can still pass pheromone, but when you put mama and everybody else on top of that double screen board, as everybody in that top box flies out of their new entrance and exit, they go back into their original position, but then they realize in that bottom box there's no queen, and they start to readily take a new queen very, very soon. You can let them do that. You can just remove that top box and that double screen board and add a queen cell right in the same configuration, and even works great. You can totally do that. But you can also just take the mother colony that has mama and the bees in it, and then move it off to a new place after you do that too. There are so many ways to do it. The trick is there are ways to mitigate the risk of the split. You can get into moving boxes back and forth multiple times. You can get into moving brood or mama in different yards. There are so many different ways to do it, but those are a couple that work really good for us. Brian, what about you?
Like all of my splits in prior years, well, I guess I'll just go back about 2 years, because before that I really didn't know much of anything. But all of my splits that I've done, it's like I said earlier, I'll keep an eye on them, and when I see the drones and I see like the signs, like the cups and things like that, then I will basically just split the colony. Now I always run double deeps. So for me to take 8 frames, basically just split those colonies in half, it really, in my view, I'm setting them up all equal, because they're all getting split. And then like you said, I'll smash down, any cells that I see and put in the mated. And it's worked. That process worked out exceptionally well for me. I'm probably going to try a couple different tricks this year just to maintain numbers, because if I split everything out, I'm going to end up with too much, and it's just the time thing for me. But I always go down to this place near Zanesville, and it always reminds me what I don't want to do. So I have to throw that out there. But like I said earlier too, I need to figure out a couple just little details for this season, because I think I have everything figured out, but I don't really, you know. But I mean, like everybody has said, there's so many different ways to split colonies. I think I do it the easy way. How I've always gone about, and just through my process is, I'll shake them all down, throw an excluder, on it, and you basically all get nurse bees up top, and when you move it, the queen's not in there. It's an easy way to split a colony. If you want to look for the queen and move her, yeah, I mean, so there's many different ways. I mean, heck, I could probably, I think I've done 2 or 3 different ways to split colonies, but I think I'm more focused on how I do it now, just because I more have a reason behind why I'm doing it. Um, I, this year's going to be tricky. This year will definitely be tricky for me. So it will, because I know when I do a couple of my splits this year, I'm gonna get my resource, those double nukes, back into action. And part of my reasoning for getting the double nukes out there is I'm gonna stack supers over those bad boys, because those things produce a honey crop like you would not believe. I've seen a couple people doing that. I saw Natalie doing that at her place. A couple people did it, and that's what I want is a pretty another decent honey crop. So I'm going to do some splits into those double nukes and hopefully stack up some supers on them, because those things, if you have two strong colonies that are just pounding supers, oh my God.
Mhm.
So, I got to figure out a couple things, and I'm close to it, you know, but
Well,
I'm definitely not like my splitting though. It's not like Greg, you know, Greg has, he's context is key. We'll say that, Greg has a different reason why he does his splits.
yeah,
Me, I think part of, and I didn't really realize it until probably about a half an hour ago, honest. Part of my reasoning of doing splits was always to expand the apiary so that I had a buffer of colonies when I had winter loss. So this season here will probably be the first year that I do splits as a hobbyist, where I'm trying to maintain numbers. I don't want to split out too much, and I'm probably going to try and maintain a couple colonies to keep them from swarming, just manage them and stack them up and pull a bumper crop. So
sure.
this is going to be the first year that I think I'll probably do things a little different than what I always have in the past, just because I have a different focus,
Yeah.
as a hobbyist.
What about you, Bruce? What's your go-to Alabama splitting method?
Well, let me address this comment here. Once again, I appreciate the super chat there, Hayden. And also, I know Brian Lee earlier and some others that have donated tonight to the chat. But he's got a really good comment here that I think many people probably feel. He says, "Is it just me, or does it feel like after 2 years of doing this, I still feel like I'm blind looking at a hive, trying to guess when I can do what they talk about with splits, or am I just scared?" It's an intimidating thing, Hayden, and anyone on here who hasn't done a split yet or is really nervous about it. When you open up a colony of bees, and you'll see my next video coming out, hopefully the next day or two. I had a very similar situation yesterday in a bee yard where I had went into the bee yard with a plan, and it completely changed and flip flopped. And if I had been a new beekeeper, I wouldn't have really known what to do at all. I just would have been, oh my gosh, what do I do? And in this particular case, in the past, I might have just left this colony alone and let them do their thing, but I went ahead and tried something, and we'll see if it works. But Hayden, you gotta realize, I mean, the bees are, I would encourage you to just go ahead and try some things. Once again, I kind of recently have thought about this. You can kind of almost, when you talk about medicine, the medical field, you say a physician is practicing medicine, right? Or veterinarians practicing veterinary medicine, or whatever. If you talk about a clinic, it's a medical practice. So, even though these doctors are trained in what they're doing, and the medical professionals know what, are trained, and they treat patients, they are, they're practicing the things that they've learned, and they're working on these things. I think in beekeeping, it's a little bit like that. You have to practice what you're doing. You have to get out there and learn principles and techniques, and try them out and see what happens. And there are some pretty, nothing is fail proof. Greg, you say there are no absolutes, and it's true. There are no absolutes in beekeeping, but there are some pretty tried and true methods that work for splits. And Brian actually hit on my favorite form of splitting earlier. I learned this when I was a new beekeeper. There's a YouTube guy. He's older now, but his name is Walls Bee Man. If you've ever seen him, he hasn't made a lot of videos lately. He used to make quite a few, and just good as gold. He's from down in Mississippi, I believe. He gets out there with the bandana around his head. He wears gloves on his hands, and he's basically straddling hives and working on them. And I loved his channel. Learned so much from him. Back in the day, he's one of the original guys that taught me some things, but I still utilize a version of one of his split methods. I think he calls it the easiest split ever, or something like that is the name of the title, is the title of the video. Probably back in 2014 or so was when I saw it. But basically, it's like you said, Brian, if you've got a double stacked box or whatever, or even if you just got a single box, it can be a nuke, it can be a 10 frame deep. I've used all kinds of variations. But you go into that box and you find the resources you need. You find a frame of food, however strong you want to make it, 1 or 2 or 3 frames of brood. You want to make sure you have honey, pollen, and you want to have at least a frame or 2 of brood. And you pull that, you shake all the bees off of those frames into that box down below, and you replace those frames with new frames. probably most people would say, especially early in the year, scoot all those frames together down below, so all the broods together, especially if it's still getting cold outside. You can put drawn comb or foundation on the outside, put a queen excluder over it, because all the bees are down below. You know where the queen is, right? You know where she's at. Then you take those frames of brood and you put another box on top, and you just put the brood in there. Even if it's 4 or 5 frames, you don't have to fill the whole box up. Then you can if you want, but you just let it sit there. You put a box and a lid on there, the top on there. You just let it sit there, preferably overnight, but you can even do it. I've even done it last year when I did my split central pollination. It's the technique we used. I'll let them sit there for a few hours, came back. Those nurse bees come up to the brood. It's the nurse bees because they're up there on that brood, right? They will come and cover that brood because it needs to be covered. The queen's down below, so you don't have to find the queen, right? And then you take that box off, set it on a bottom board or on a new pallet or wherever you want to do it. You can do it, Greg, like you said, in the same bee yard, or you could take the bottom box with the queen in it and move it, and then set that box right down there. And then they're ready to introduce a new queen, and it works. You can take that box away to another bee yard if you want, but that is my favorite method. It's pretty much fail proof. You know where the queen is, you've got the resources you need, and they're queenless. So you can pretty much drop that queen or queens or whatever in there. And that's my favorite method, but I've tried all kinds of things. You can I've done walk away splits, which I don't think necessarily have the strongest queens. Sometimes they turn out really good, but sometimes they fizzle out pretty quickly because they make them out of emergency queens. Last year I learned a new technique from Gus Mitchell. It's called a flyback split. And I did one and it worked, but I can't remember all the details on it. It's a little bit more complicated. It's kind of like a modified walk away, but you set the bees up for better success. And so there's all kinds of ways to do it. My favorite by far is the queen excluder. I like doing what you said, Greg, where you have the nukes, 5-frame nukes, you let them stack them up, but you can use that same method. You can just shake all the bees down, put the queen excluder over that bottom nuke, and then they all move up to the top one. You don't have to even manipulate frames that way as long as there's brood in both boxes. Take that top nuke off and move it. Another thing you can do if it's stacked a couple deep is you put the queen excluder between the 2 boxes, and then you can look for eggs like 3 or 4 days later, and whichever box has the eggs in it is where the queen is. So then you know which one to move or how you want to manipulate them. So there's so many ways to do it, but my favorite by far is the queen excluder method. I love that method.
The easiest split that I think I've made, I'm going to say it, and it's going to catch some flack, I'm sure, but it's so easy. You might wonder why you didn't do it before. And I know why you didn't do it before, because you didn't have the heart to do it. But at some point, we have to understand that the bees are assets and we have resources in the yard. At some point, you get to where you don't need or have a use for all those extra resources. That sounds crazy, but hear me out. One of the easiest ways to make a split, take doubles, put them side by side, drop 2 queen cells, put an extra lid on, and go down the road.
That's right.
Because what's going to happen is it's going to hatch, and that new version is going to come out. They're going to duke it out, and no matter what you do, both boxes are going to be queen right, and you just doubled your numbers just like that. Now, people are going to argue and say that is so mean to do that to the old queen. Why wouldn't you take that queen and put it into a resource hive? Well, that's true. Those are all true, valid, solid points. But sometimes you're good to go. You are squared away. You don't need any more bees. You don't need any more colonies. You get to a certain point where every move you make costs you $1 or $5 or $10,000. So keeping every queen in every box, especially when they're already a year old, doesn't make any financial sense to spend the effort and the time to make the split with the old queen in it. A lot of times the easiest thing to do is drop that brand new, fresh, capped queen cell that's going to hatch tomorrow or in 12 hours. Let them sort it out. Go on down the road.
We did that exact thing last year, Greg, the end of February here in Alabama, believe it or not. We did exactly what you mentioned. Every single colony that was strong enough to split didn't look for the queen, just pulled the resources out, just set the boxes a little ways away, came by a day or two later, dropped queen cells on every one of them. And we had phenomenal success with that. The bees, they do just figure it out. And I think sometimes that cell will emerge and kill the old queen if she's failing, but if she's not, then maybe she'll take the new. Anyway, they figure it out. And I did want to kind of mention something you talked about earlier about waiting a week to put the queen cell in or the new queen in. that is a method that Corey talked about with me the other day, is that he said it's not, it's not traditional. It's not what people do. But
Mm-hmm.
if you think about in nature how they do things, when they're going to swarm, that queen stops laying. She backs off her laying. They build those queen cells, and then they swarm, and then those new bees emerge. They accept them. It's just like it's been a week since there has really been a lot of eggs and stuff in the hive, and really you're kind of mimicking what nature does there. If you go in a week later and destroy all those queen cells, they have no way to make a new queen, so they almost have to accept your queen. Hayden Maxwell, follow-up question here. Thanks again for the super chat, Hayden. Scares me that the risks to have them fly and never come back feels like shooting myself in the foot trying to get my return for the price I paid. Let me just put you at ease a little bit, Hayden. That is definitely a concern. However, if you think about it, if you've got 2 colonies, if you split those and you end up with 4, even if you lose one of the new colonies, you still have 3. Even if you are 50% success on that, you're still going to have 3. The bees will multiply, and if you're not super careful with controlling swarms and so forth, you may lose some that way too. And you can't be paralyzed with the thought of losing bees, because if you're a beekeeper for long, you're going to lose some bees here or there. Yeah. So just take confidence and be willing to try things. And what you'll find is that you'll have some failures, you'll have some successes, and you'll grow from those successes, and you'll gain confidence, and you'll get better and better at it, and it'll become much more fun for you. And it is something that everybody goes through, the thought of losing bees, especially when you're new, I still don't like to lose bees. It still makes me sick when I go and I find the dead out, or I did something to kill some bees, or I did something wrong, but you just have to try it. I think. And you guys have any words of encouragement for Hayden there? What do you think?
One thing I would say is you are not alone. And I think as we develop as beekeepers, the way we look at those changes. I'm right there with you, Hayden. I've been in the spot where the queen didn't come back. I've got barn swallows swooping in front of my boxes. I've got dragonflies. Everything is against me and that queen coming back. It totally happens. That's going to be something that you work through and you kind of figure out. But something, and I don't know that I have a gentle way of saying this, but at some point in your beekeeping career, you almost develop this, I don't want to say Viking mentality, but you get in there, and even although it looks like it's a deficit or it's a problem, right? You can always look at it as an opportunity. Well, what can I do with this? The queen didn't come back. I have this box of bees. What am I going to do? At some point you decide, I'm either going to take the risk and I'm going to push through the fear and I'm going to see what happens, and it's going to be a learning opportunity. Or you sit there and you stare at the box and you stare at, and next thing you know, 10 minutes have gone by. You're staring at an open box of bees. They're getting agitated. They're flying around you. You're no further than you were 10 minutes ago. And then you close the lid and you get back to the house, and then you Google it and you think about it. And then maybe you come back the next day. There's something to be said where when things go wrong, always know that quality trumps quantity every day of the week in the bee yard. When you have a box like that where there's no queen and you've got 5 frames or 3 frames of bees when you made your split, cool. Either A, combine them and don't look back. 2, just like if you had a situation where you did that, the queen never came back, you sat on it, you thought about it. Now we're 7 days later, we're 10 days later, we're 2 weeks later, and those workers decide that they're going to take their future in their own hand and start laying it up themselves. Now we've gone from a troubling situation with no queen coming back to a very bad situation. When it goes to very bad, that's when in doubt, you shake them out. Take every single bee off those frames, shake them onto the ground, move all of their resources, give them to somebody else who can use it, who can boost and propel that next colony forward. But if you did that right when the queen failed, you could have done the same exact thing too. You could have likely combined those two. You might have a couple that are going to fight, but they're going to work it out, and everything is going to be hunky dory. If you're worried about even doing that right there in the box, if the queen's not back and your timelines you're on point and you know she should already been home and nobody's there, cool. When in doubt, still shake them out. Shake all those bees right onto the ground. Take all of those frames, put them right back in the box, super something else with it, and come back tomorrow and you're going to notice All those bees are gone. Where'd they go? They got absorbed into every other colony. Either way, your yard is moving forward, your asset is growing, your asset is building. And I hate to say it like that, but when I am in love with my bees and I am in tune with them and I want the very best for them. If you start treating your bee yard like a business, it's a unit and it's an asset, and we want the asset to constantly be growing. When you start thinking of it as an asset and you're doing what's right to grow that asset, you also end up doing what's right by the bees. Is it right for you to let that colony with no queen, sit there and idle and slowly go downhill and dwindle? I don't think so. So there's things that we can do that seem ruthless like a Viking, but it's an important thing to think about as you grow your yard. Quality over quantity.
You say
Go ahead,
ruthless like a Viking, though. If you think about, in beekeeping, we look at Mother Nature for a lot of things. What's Mother Nature doing? Am I going to be able to work in the hives? Am I going to do this? I'm waiting for Mother Nature to warm up a little bit. Mother Nature is brutal. If you think about Mother Nature doesn't care, So you have to almost look at it that way. And that if you're going to pinch a failing queen and you're going to do this and that, I think us as beekeepers, and I'm going to throw out a word that we haven't used it in a little while. I don't think, that anthropomorphize. I think the emotions and everything get to us beekeepers, and it takes us over sometimes when, really we need to just take a step back and like Greg says, drop two cells in and let them duke it out. That's what Mother Nature does best right there, and the strong will survive, and your colonies will survive. So, I think, for Hayden, just keep at it, and there's Hayden, I'll say too, there's a lot of people in here that I've seen in chat wanting to know like where you're at and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the great things about this community here is everybody wants to help out everybody. So, Hayden, keep at it. There's a phrase out there you'll hear about beekeepers quitting after 3 years, and just keep at it, because in those first 3 years, that's what is it, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
No, don't say that. That's painful.
But
you hit the Dunning-Burns curve. I've been there too.
Yeah, you hit that peak where you're doing good, and then when reality hits you and you hit that valley of despair, keep your head up, because I've been there, Bruce has been there, Greg has been there, and just keep your head up and you'll come out of it and you'll succeed,
Yeah, real quick. And Hayden kind of had a follow-up comment here that he's just almost, he looks at the front of the hive. It just sounds like he's kind of intimidated and scared to get in there. But Hayden, you've got to get in those bees, man. Not in the middle of the winter if you're up north, but man, you gotta get in them and learn from them. And you just got to get your hands in there and be willing to work with them. That's just part of bees. Just enjoy them, and like DC says here, and now listen, don't hesitate to reach out. The best thing you can do, if you can find a local bee club or a mentor to kind of help walk you through that, maybe go work with their bees a little bit, have them come out and help you. If there's no one local, or if you can't find anyone locally, you can reach out to so many people in this chat. Just kind of message one of us. We'll be glad to kind of help walk you through whatever, if you have specific questions. But that's beekeeping. It's intimidating if you're brand new at it. It is hard, but you got it. If you have bees and you don't get in them, it's going to be very difficult to be successful. So you got to get in them and learn. You got to learn the frames. You got to learn the bees. You got to get those vibes, and that's the fun part of it, is being in those colonies and learning from those little critters and the bugs in a box, as Greg calls it. You got to get in there and become one with the bees, so to speak. It sounds a little corny, but it's true.
It's true.
You got to learn to read those bees. And at first you'll feel clumsy. You'll feel, insufficiently prepared. You won't really know what you're doing. But as you start to spend time in there and work with them, you'll definitely be able to gain some skills and experience, and continue to learn from local mentors and from folks. Us, we're willing to help you out too. See Seth here. Hey Seth, by the way, man, listen, Seth, by the way, I really enjoyed your interview with Greg the other night. And I told Greg earlier, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone that had more energy and more positivity in a 2 hour. I mean, my gosh, man, just hyper, but positive and happy. Man, Teach me how to be like that, man. I want to have some of your energy rub off on me.
What's
But
cool
Seth
about
says,
Seth is he's just like that in person. He's just like that when you break bread. He's
absolutely.
just like that in the bee yard. He's got the fire in his eye. He's got the grit in the gut. So,
Well, he you know, you can tell some people when they're real and some people when they're just putting on a front, and there's no front with Seth.
Mm-mm.
Like, I mean, if that was a front, then he's the best at it ever, because you can tell he's just 100% hardcore, just raw.
Either way,
just
he's
raw.
going places with it.
What
So.
you see is what you get. So anyway, he says here, I killed 40 or 50 before I got a good handle, my dude. If you need any help, hit me up sometime. We'll help you out.
That's what it's
And
about.
so, Hayden, there you go. There's an offer from a guy who works hand in hand with Bob Benny, who is one of the just a icon in the industry right now. So
Yeah,
Bruce, one thing I want to add to Hayden there is, you know, not a single one of us ever grew and got better doing something that we're good at, or that was easy, or that wasn't uncomfortable. Get
that's right.
uncomfortable. Get in that position where you don't know what to do, and you have to work it out. You have to figure it out. You have to take a chance. You have to take a risk. When you get uncomfortable, that's where the magic happens. And that's where you learn. And that's where you find out, well, this is what I need to do. And you learn not so much what to do, but you learn why. And a lot of times these bees will humble you and they will teach you at the same time. So don't be afraid. Get comfortable. Get
That's right.
comfortable.
And I'll also add, you know, we talk on here, we start talking about intentional beekeeping, which is important. So that's also could be intimidating for someone who is brand new. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But initially, you know, the learning curve, you don't know a lot, but the intention that you have, the purpose of going in is to learn. You've always got to have a reason to go in. And even if it's just to learn the bees or to try something new, that's the reason you're doing it. As you develop your skills, then the goals become more succinct. You become more in tune with what you want to do, and you kind of know what to expect, or you kind of know what you're looking for. But at the beginning, the reason you're in there is to learn and to learn how to grow. Obviously, it's better if you have a mentor. That's one of the best things you can do, because they'll help support you. They'll help keep you on the right path and help you avoid mistakes. But either way, you got to get in the bees and learn from the bees, and you can do it, man. Everybody on here that's got bees knows that. And we've all lost bees. We've all done things wrong. Don't let that paralyze you. Do not let it paralyze you. You got to get in them, and otherwise it's, you know, you're not going to be able to grow from it like you want to. So anyway, hopefully that helps Hayden out a little bit. We appreciate your comments, Hayden, and everybody else that's been on here. We really appreciate you.
Hey, if you look at 2 years ago, and I think it's right about this time of the year right now, February of 2021, and I think it might be about on the day, February 15th, and around there, I had 5 colonies going into the winter. And when I went out to check them, second or third week of February, Hayden, I lost every single one of my colonies. So I had 5 and ended up coming out of the winter with 0.
And here you are on your way to sideliner. It's a beautiful thing, Brian.
Oh,
comeback king. That's awesome.
Well, guys, it's been fun, man. We've hit some really cool topics, and
we've only scratched the surface, Bruce.
Oh yeah.
Well, when it comes to swarm control, swarms, splits, when it comes down to the bare bones and the nuts and bolts of beekeeping, you know, I told you about Tim's video I watched a few years ago, and how he did the splits with the queen excluder, and I've done a variation of that. I mean, that's my basic, you know, backbone, or the basic philosophy I use on a lot of my splits. But I've got all kinds of variations from that. You know, it's just, so it's not just exactly, it doesn't have to be done exactly that way. And so, you know, I could go off on each one of those little variations on a tangent and talk about that. Or I could talk about, you know, the queen cell, dropping them in like you discussed. You can do it. You know, I did want to mention one thing that came to mind, Greg, and I'm not sure if we've talked about this on a stream team video before. I think we've talked about it in person for sure. But one time, the first year I had bees, I was thinking about doing the palletizing and starting to grow, and maybe send a few colonies off to pollination. And I made a bunch of splits. I used mated queens. I think I had, Greg, you're familiar with the driveway where I started beekeeping up there. If you're driving up towards my mom's house on the right-hand side, where actually a couple of your queens are, actually the one that I did on the short today on my channel is one of those along that side of the driveway. Well, when I made those splits that year, I had some queens that I had put in there. I did the splits, and you can go back and watch the video from that year. It was like, I think in 2019 or 2020, I had these kind of red colored nukes, and I had them all lined up along the driveway there. I did them with the method where I'd stack the 2 nukes on top of each other, put the queen excluder in there, let the bees move up, and then I took the box away and put them at the farm, and I put mated queens in there. Well, they grew and they got strong, and I remember it was, I think it was in May or early June. I think it was in May. So they were pretty strong. They grew into beautiful little colonies. And I decided I was going to take them out and palletize and put on some pallets. And so I was driving my son's black Ford Ranger then, the little truck. I packed that thing up. I think I had 9 or 10 in there, and just removed all those colonies, all those nukes from that side of the driveway. And I didn't plug them up really. It was in the morning, the foragers were gone. And so by the time I got them in the truck, there was a cloud of bees because they came home and there was nothing there. Right. And so I'm like, of course, I have more colonies around there. I probably had 10 or 15 more colonies in that area or something like that. And so I'm like, well, there are all those bees flying around. We'll see what happens. And there were no more colonies right there. All the colonies were, I think, across the street from there or up a little ways away. So it's not like the bees could go right into a colony right there in that area. I went and dropped those nukes off and came back, and there wasn't a bee flying anywhere over there. They had all found a colony to go to. And so it is a misnomer when people say bees won't go into another colony, or they'll fight when they go to another. If they come home with some food, if they come in with some food, those colonies are going to let them in, regardless. Now, if they come in to rob, they got another
different story.
Coming. But if they come in with food, with pollen, or loaded up with honey, and they go back, just about any colony will accept those bees to come in. So that's a little bit of a myth that people have, that you can't do that. I've even taken or seen people take, if you have a weak colony and a strong colony and you want to increase the population, just switch places, put the weak colony where strong colony is, and those foragers will come back in and they'll strengthen that colony this week. And the other one's already strong, so they'll go ahead and develop, and that can give them a good boost too. And so there are all kinds of tricks of the trade out there. There are no what, Greg? No absolutes. That's right. So,
if you think about it in a way, it's almost like if somebody comes knocking on your front door, if they're going to rob you, you're going to be upset. But if somebody comes knocking on your front door and they want to come in and they've got a box of Krispy Kremes, let them,
or cinnamon rolls, or
cinnamon rolls, or whatever.
If Ed McMahon knocks on the door with that big giant check, what are you going to say? I'm not in the mood.
Right.
Open the door. Come on in. We'll make a pot of coffee. Of course. Come on now.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
Bruce, we have 6 minutes left before it's officially 2 hours. Do we have any other last minute things that what are you guys up to this coming week?
I'm just gonna, right now I'm a little bit of a holding pattern with the bees gone to pollination. So I'm right now in preparation mode, just kind of peeking in, making sure they've got the weight. I've got some that are, with the warm weather and there's not a huge flow coming in. They're going through some food stores. So I've got this Hive Alive fondant I'm putting on the colonies. I'll actually put a link to that when this video ends, either today or tomorrow, in the description for Hive Alive fondant. You get 10% off if you put Bruce 10 in there. You can also do that at Brian's channel. I know, Greg, you sell that as well at Nature's Image Farm, right? The Hive Alive fondant. And so you can go to
that.
Greg.
And pollen patties is the new, is what getting shipped out now, is the Hive Alive pollen patties, which has the global patty in it, which is 100% USA real pollen in it. But where I think this is special and is set off and different from everything else is it has the Hive Alive liquid in it, which has thymol, which I'm a huge fan of on keeping the gut clean, and all the other benefits that those things have in the colony. Those are on the website, nature'simagefarm.com. We ship them out. Nutrition's a big deal. Really helps.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of, I'm just peeking in on them, not doing a lot of management now. I'm doing some, trying to kind of keep everybody posted on the channel, what I'm doing. I also do have planned in the future to do some more interviews with folks, kind of like I did with Corey and Tom, just to kind of improve that, intentional beekeeping playlist on my channel. Just going there. I'm trying to do some nuts and bolts stuff there, some things, just maybe a little different approach. With some folks. You'll see some folks pop up there in the next little while if I can get some of those interviews set up. Also, don't forget I've got a Stream Team Nuggets section on my channel where you can go in. I need to get it back. It's hard to go back through all these Stream Team videos
I
and pull out
know.
those nuggets. But if
Yep.
anyone has a favorite clip from one of our stream teams about a topic that you think everyone needs to hear, just please let me know what that is. And for my channel, those, Brian and Greg have to do their own thing, but on my channel,
I'll just do ours for us, Bruce. Come on.
one of the videos that was on my channel, just go in there and tell me what clip that
Yours.
is, when it was, and I can definitely pull that out and put it up there. But it's just tough to wade through all those darn videos, and they're all about 2 hours long, and that's my thought process is, I mean, it's hard to go back and watch a 2 hour video. It was a 2 hour video, but if I can pull out the high points of a 10 to 15 to 20 minute video and just put it up there individually, then folks can go back and be more likely to be able to pull that out instead of trying to wade through everything. So my goal is to do some more of those, but it's just really tough right now. My most viewed videos are the ones where I'm actually in the bees. And so I've got to continue doing those. And that's what people want to see, is they want to see the bees. But I want to make this channel more than just a vlog. I want it to be a place where folks can come and find some good information about how to improve what they're doing and maybe have a better result with what they're doing. And the only way I know to do that is to talk to people who are smarter than me, who can help me, like Corey and Tom both. I mean, I learned in that total of maybe about an hour, 2 hours total between the two interviews. Man, I learned so much information that I just did not know. And didn't know anything about Formic Pro until that day to speak of, except that it was formic acid. That's about it. But talking to Corey, I'd heard a lot of those terms and acronyms, but I really didn't know what they meant. And so that was just a really bare bones, break it down, and if he, Corey is the ultimate bee nerd. I mean, he knows his stuff from a scientific, kind of like Greg there, just knows everything. And but I had to kind of say, hey, but what does that mean? What do those letters mean? But he did a tremendous job of breaking down, like, SMR means this, and that's what that means. SMR, that means, he went down and said what the definition of it was, and then exactly what it meant. He differentiated between hygienic and VSH. Are all hygienic bees VSH bees, or all VHS bees hygienic? He just kind of broke everything down, and we compared and contrasted. And so if you want to find out about, if you hear the term VHS thrown out there, if you see queen breeders advertising hygienic bees, I think that'll be a valuable video for you to watch to see exactly what that means, so you know what you're getting. And and the thing I like about Corey is he's not unrealistic about what he's talking about. He's like, look, if even if you have VSH queens, but they're going in a situation where they're going to pick up mites, he's like, you might need to knock those mites back. It's okay, go ahead and treat. He's not telling people not to treat. He's just telling people, he's trying to develop, I think, a better, more mite resistant bee and disease resistant bee, but he's not saying my way or the highway. He's not like that. He's just really, I think he's got a great approach, but he is absolutely obsessed with trying to figure out how to do this. And so I was impressed by that. Between talking to Corey and then, some of Greg's talk that I have, I'm pretty excited about the future of where Bruce's Bees is going here in Southeast Alabama, and just learning some things, and we'll see what happens, but that's kind of where I'm going. Going to be trying to throw up some videos. I'm obsessed with YouTube too, in case you guys can't tell, but I'm really obsessed with the bees. That's where it all starts. And hopefully I can do a better job this year. And Greg, we've talked a little bit about, I just want to get more of your stock down here. We're going to figure out a way to do that. And that's kind of one of my goals this year, is to work with Greg a little bit, and let's get some things rolling here in Southeast Alabama and see how these Caucasian Appalachians mutts do right down here in this tough environment down here in summertime.
Yeah. Awesome. Brian, what about you? What's coming up for you this week?
Oh, I tell you what, I gotta make a run to grab some boards, because I gotta start making stands, just because, I mean, I think everybody pretty much knows I went to all individual stands last year. Worked out really well, just as far as managing them. You can work them from any angle. So I want to get my stands built probably Saturday. Sunday, I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna visit Nature's Image Farm. We're gonna chat bees, and I'll probably drive home with some equipment. So it's like a top secret mission. Only Greg will know what's in the back of my car. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that just because it'll kind of get me started out for the year. I'll have my stands getting built out. I'll have my equipment, coming. So it'll be good. I mean, and I'm thinking, I was about ready to drive over and pull my pollen patties out of the freezer and drop them just because we got this weather and all that. And now I'm looking in the next 2 weeks we've got some 40s and that. But my plan though also, and Greg, your long lost father / uncle / distant relative there just put up a video the other day, and it touched on like almost spot on from a direction that I went last year, and that is throwing on, and this is like you said very very early on in this discussion tonight, throwing on that pollen to boost them up into the very first flows and the very first
Yes.
those first
Big
blooms.
deal.
So it is, and if you can weather, the worry of what am I doing? We don't have anything out there and I'm boosting them. If you get comfortable with that, if you think about it, like he showed his video was pretty good in that he showed like the days as far as the duties of those bees. And you're at like, I think 41 or 43 days when they're going to forage. So if I boost them now and I throw pollen patties on, if you're looking at 43 days from February 15th, where are we? We're almost April. So anything that I do now is going to boost my foraging population end of March, beginning of April. So I did that last year and it worked out exceptionally well. So that's probably what I'm going to do in the next week is I'm going to throw just some little squares on just to see how they take it, because I don't want to get into a situation where there's one or two beetles that kind of hid throughout the winter, and I don't want to end up with a problem. So that's going to be it. I mean, I've got some equipment that's going to be coming and just starting out the season, I guess, with dropping some small chunks of pollen patties. So, and of course, they're the Hive Alive. Everybody knows I love my Hive Alive product. So it's just, last year, if anyone on here, please use like Bruce 10 for that 10% off. Last year was the very first solid season that I supplemented the entire year. And I can 100% say I never had populations like I did last year, ever.
Yep.
So, but yeah, you just have to be comfortable with it. And like Bruce says too, intentional, know why you're doing it, and just look at, all the details of, don't just look at a video, know why you're doing it. There has to be a purpose as to why you're doing it. So that's it.
Greg, bring it home, man. Give us some words of wisdom.
Okay, well, I just want to echo first, Bruce, I really enjoyed your interview with not only Corey, but also Tom Nolan. There's always little things to learn and pick up when you take that approach with somebody. When wisdom speaks, you listen. And there was a lot of wise words spoke by both of them. So I appreciate you taking time out to have those conversations and then share them with everybody. That's just a way we all keep learning. We can all keep doing better with our beekeeping. So that's a big deal, Bruce. So I appreciate you doing that. And those were great videos to watch. If you haven't already seen those, make sure you check out Bruce's interview with Tom Nolan of Not Apiary, and also the VSH conversation that Bruce had with Corey Stevens. It's good stuff. Now, I know Brian's also going to have a lot of great content coming out as he's checking in on his colonies. And when you guys when you hear Brian talk about Hive Alive, and you're thinking, well, that's great, he's got how many hives, but does that apply to me if I have 50 or 100 or I have 200? I just want to plant that little seed right now, where you've heard the saying that complacency kills. Complacency can also equal a diminishing return on your investment. Last year was also another year that we went all in with Hive Alive. We had Hive Alive in our Pro Suite that we had mixed up. We had put fondant on in the wintertime, and we're getting ready to put the protein patties on here soon. like Brian, I've never seen my bees so prolific, so vibrant, and so productive. There's a lot of things going good with that. Is it more expensive than doing nothing? Yeah, it is. Is it more expensive than making up your own? Yeah, it is. But it might be for you. And for me, I know with a shadow of a doubt that my bees were way more productive. And I'm sorry if you hate it that I keep bringing bees back to an asset or to a unit, but that's the context I'm working within. For the investment that I put into my asset, my return on that investment was huge and was greater than any other year that I've ever seen. So for me, there's something there, and we're going to keep going in that direction. We're getting ready to do the same thing. We've had dry pollen sub out. The bees are tearing it up. And here's something I want to throw out there. Let's say you think that the artificial pollen sub is going to cause your bees to brood early. I want you to spend a little bit of time and dig in and understand what is the mechanism inside of the colony that actually causes them to brood up. Is it because they're going and getting artificial pollen? There has to be a couple other things that are happening simultaneously inside of a colony before that colony says, okay, now it's time to make brood. We're not there yet in the season. Just because we have willows or hazels or crocus or things that are producing a little bit of pollen does not necessarily mean the colony is going into brood rearing mode. When we put artificial pollen sub out this time of year, doesn't mean that in and of itself is going to trigger them to go into brood rearing mode. And just because we put something on like a Hive Alive protein patty on this time of year does not mean in and of itself it's going to cause that colony to brood prematurely. There's several things that have to happen. But one thing that we can learn from the bees is whether we put that dry pollen out or that patty out, guess what they're doing? They're hitting the pig feed. They're hitting the chick feed. They're hitting anywhere they can find any kind of a carbohydrate and a protein. They're hitting it and they're taking it back home. So if we want to pretend that we know better than the bees, some of the times we can't just pick and choose when that's going to be. If we look at the bees and we see what they're doing and we play to that, our beekeeping, it transforms and it goes places that we could never, ever imagine. So for us, just like Brian, we are getting ready to start putting our Hive Alive patty, protein patties on everything, but we're not putting the full 1-pounders on. We're going to start with 1/3. We're going to cut each 1-pounder into thirds. We're going to slap it on. We're going to monitor it. Just because it's 40 degrees outside of the hive does not mean it's 40 degrees inside of the hive. And just because it's 40 degrees outside of the hive doesn't mean that the colony inside of the hive can't keep growing. So this is not something I'm just throwing out of the middle of nowhere. We're talking about commercial beekeeping approaches. And when these guys are doing it at large scale, it's not because they have a warm and fuzzy feeling. It's because they're seeing results by doing that. So I just want to challenge folks to just keep an open mind with these things. If I've said something tonight, whether it's the way we feed in the wintertime, if it's how we make splits, if it's why we make splits, if that bothers you, if that irritates you, if it stirs something up on the inside, I make no apologies for that. For me, it's like being that kid sitting in that country church and my grandpa was the preacher. And I said, Grandpa, why are you always talking about me every Sunday? There's something there. There's something that you have to work out on the inside with that. When we're putting out this kind of information, we are not telling you to do this. We're not telling you how to do this. We leave that to Mike Berry. Right, Brian? It's important to just always remember we are simply sharing our experience and we are throwing out ideas on what is working for us in our context, in our scales, with our goals in mind. You can 100% take it and you can leave it. There's no pressure to do anything. All we want to do is share with you these tips and tricks, things that are force multipliers, game changers, and make this beekeeping successful for us. We're not getting paid to do this. We are sharing this information. A lot of folks have been arguing for years that the old timers, they don't share the tips and tricks. They aren't sharing the things that actually make them successful. We are. We're sharing with you folks what is successful for us. We're trying our very best to explain the context and the scale that we're working with so you guys can understand if and when and why these things may or not work for you. So I just ask you to keep that in mind. And I promise you, I'm going to step down from the pulpit. We've got a lot of speaking engagements coming up over the next couple months. You can go to our website at nature'simagefarm.com, click on the events, see if we're coming to a bee club near you. We have a lot of talks that are geared around hard lessons learned making splits and rearing queens, hard lessons learned growing a bee business. That's what we do. I am more interested in sharing with you all the things that we have done wrong or we've learned the hard way than to me to get up here and posture and pontificate on all the things that I think I've done right. So I hope that you guys also find value in that too. That being said, if you're interested in anything that we can do for you, whether it's nukes, packages, queens, supplies, or you just have questions, go to our website, naturesimagefarm.com. You can find what we have to offer there. You can also hit that contact us, shoot me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to talk about bees and do anything I can to help anybody. So on that note, Bruce, I'm going to step down from my pulpit for the night.
Oh, all right. Great. Close it out with your saying, Greg.
As always, I want to thank everyone tonight for jumping on with this, spending time, sharing your thoughts, sharing your ideas, and engaging in the comments. When you guys share these videos, when you share them with your friends, when you start to engage and create that dialogue, that's how we're all better together. It's how we all move together. A rising tide definitely raises all ships. And so I want to thank everybody for being open, for being honest, being transparent, but also sharing this information out of love and not trying to do it to be divisive. So I want to remind you, as always, to be the lighthouse and be the change that you want to see in this world. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Bye, y'all.